Hi, my name is Emily Doden, and today I'm going to present a presentation on ways that I found to cut onions without crying. So for me, I really enjoy cooking, and so I thought of this experiment because one random day I was cooking with onions and realized that my eyes began to water, and my dad made a comment about how he had read an article about ways to make sure that your eyes don't cry when you cut onions. And so that intrigued me and gave me the idea for this project. And so for the introduction, just how often do you use onions when you're in the kitchen? Often your eyes water, burn, or itch. Some people wear goggles when they cut onions to make sure that this doesn't happen. And so this project is going to help find ways to eliminate those side effects from cutting onions. Before I started the project, I did a little bit of research, and so according to Britannica, when you cut or crush onions, the cell walls of the onions become damaged. And because onions absorb sulfur when the enzymes are separated, they reach the sulfur amino acids and they form these unstable acids, which creates a chemical. And this chemical vaporizes and creates a burning sensation when it encounters someone's eyes. So there are a few researched ways to prevent this crying from happening. Three things that I read. The first one was to chill your onions. And so this could be putting them in the fridge or the freezer for about 15 minutes, which gets the onion cold and prevents eye irritation. And this is going to happen because the amount of chemicals released through the cutting is reduced because it has been chilled. The second tip was to fan away the fumes by using a range hood or a small fan. We need to make sure that the fan is blowing away from the eyes so that it will blow the chemicals away. And the third tip was to cut the onions under cold water. And the cold running water will lower the temperature, also reducing the amount of chemicals. So after doing this research, finding these tips, I came up with my hypothesis and said that if I chill the onion before cutting it, use a fume, or cut it under running water, then my eyes will not water because the amount of chemicals released will be less than just simply cutting the onion without variables. And so when I say without variables, this just means taking the onion from the store right to your house and then cutting it. Nothing is happening besides cutting the onion that has just been bought from the store. A few materials were needed for this project, so I used 4 onions. I made sure they were all white onions, they were all of similar size, a sharp knife, a cutting board, a small fan that you can plug in and blow your fumes away. The sink and the fridge are all needed for this experiment. Procedures. So I cut the 4 onions. The first onion, I just cut it normally, and I noticed that my eyes burned, watered, blinked more often, and then I cleaned the cutting board and knife before moving on to steps 2. So the first thing, the thing I did for the first time was cut the onion normally, bring it home from the store, cut it, see what happens. Step number 2 was I cut the onion while blowing a small fan pointed away from my body. So the fumes from the fan pushed the chemicals away from me and my eyes did not cry or burn. 3 was left in the fridge for 15 minutes to cool. So this onion had been left in the fridge before the experiment started, and then I cut it after taking it out of the fridge. And the 4th step was the onion was cut under running water in a sink. So this one you have to be careful with so that you don't cut yourself because it's a little bit more dangerous, but making sure that the running water is hitting the onion while you're cutting it. Here are just a few pictures I included throughout. On the left is the 4 onions that I used. You can see that they are all similar size, similar color, similar shape. I tried to keep them as similar as possible so that the results were not skewed. And then the right picture kind of shows the process of how you can cut it effectively under the running water in the sink while also trying to be safe. So those are a few pictures that happened throughout this experiment. And this is a graph of the results. So the first onion, that first on the left, there's onion with no variables. This one was just brought home from the store, cut, and when I cut it, my eyes began to water and burn. There was also, you can tell your eyes start to blink more often when they're burning, and so there were symptoms. The second onion I cut was with the small fan, and the fan was blowing the fumes away from my body, and when I cut this, I experienced no symptoms. The third onion was left in the fridge for 15 minutes to chill, and again, after I took it out of the fridge, it had chilled, I started to cut it, I had no symptoms. And the fourth onion was cut under the running water like was shown in the picture, and again, I experienced no symptoms. So the results show that the onion without any variables created symptoms to my body, while the onions that had a variable created no symptoms. This leads into my conclusion. My hypothesis was accepted because each time I added a variable when cutting an onion, my eyes did not burn or water. So overall, just to kind of repeat what happened throughout this experiment, the first onion was cut with no variables. When I cut this onion, my eyes began to water and burn. I did expect this to happen because it has happened previously. The second, third, and fourth onion, I added variables to, which created different ways to not have the chemicals be released into my eyes. And because of these variables, I did not experience any symptoms. So again, this is all proving that my hypothesis is accepted. Through the lab, I learned why onions make someone's eyes cry. I learned about the different chemicals that onions release when you cut them. I also learned that when you cut the onion after it's chilled, when it's underwater, or when using a fume, less chemicals can be released because these variables have been applied. A few possible errors can happen throughout this lab. A few of the ones that I thought of are that the cutting board could not have been cleaned well, the onion could not have stayed chilled for 15 minutes. We need to make sure that they are being chilled for 15 minutes. And then the last one is that you're not using a sharp blade. Some research shows that the blade of the knife actually also impacts the amount of chemicals released. So making sure you're using a sharp blade and not a dull one. Here are my references that were used throughout this experiment. The first one, both of them actually are used as articles that I read about why onions make you cry, and then some solutions as to how to cut them without crying. So I am hopeful that this experiment can help you as you go about cutting onions, and hopefully using these different ways will make your eyes less watery and less burning. Thank you so much.